Hey, welcome back to the Group Project Podcast. This is episode number 89, and we're here with Dr. Derrick Joel, the superintendent of the Fort Dodge Community School District in Northwest Iowa. Dr. Joel, welcome, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for hopping on. You've got a board meeting tonight at 5:30. Is that correct?
Yeah, I got an executive team meeting at 5:30, board meeting at 6. So
Okay.
Busy night ahead of me.
So I really appreciate you hopping on. It's about 4:20 right now in our neck of the woods. So we're gonna get Dr. Joel. We're gonna ask him some questions and make sure he's got plenty of time for his executive meeting there. But hey, man, you've got quite the. We were talking a little bit before the show started. We got quite the unique background there. Why don't you go ahead and share maybe your educational experience and leadership background?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a wild journey, to say the least. But it all started growing up as a kid. Both my parents dedicated their careers to education. My father being a superintendent, my mother being a school counselor. Once my sister decided to go more of the finance route, I knew it was up to me to continue the education legacy. And so from there, went to Doane College in Crete, Nebraska. My first teaching and coaching position post-graduation was in a small rural school in DeWitt, Nebraska. And I don't expect anybody to know where that's at. But from there, it's the story of I met my now wife, Carrie, out in San Diego of all places. We went back and forth. She was a school counselor at Perry at the time. I'm just a teacher and coach in DeWitt, Nebraska. We did a year back and forth. She gave me the ultimatum, hey, either we move closer together or maybe we should split ways. And that's where I connected with Ankeny. And within the Ankeny Community School District, I started as a teacher and a coach, connected with Iowa State University to get my master's in educational leadership. Took the assistant principal position in Ankeny. That happened to be the time when we were splitting into 2 comprehensive high schools. So it was kind of an exciting time. From there, I started to work on my doctorate, or I should say my superintendent license through Drake University. All while then I became the lead principal at North Polk High School. And at that point, I was finishing my doctorate through Drake University. And then I got the phone call one day, and it was, hey, got a great opportunity back in Nebraska. Would you like to become a superintendent? I thought, that's intriguing. Somehow, some way, I convinced my wife to go to the interview. And prior to becoming the superintendent of Fort Dodge Community Schools, I was a superintendent of Raymond Central School District, just north of Lincoln, Nebraska, for 4 years.
Okay. So pretty cool. You said your wife was in Perry at the time. Is that correct?
Correct. She was a school counselor at Perry High School while I was teaching and coaching in Nebraska.
So how did you guys meet in San Diego? I don't usually get into these, but that's intriguing. Like, how did that happen?
Well, how it happened is after my first year of teaching, my high school principal at the time came in with this form. And it was an invitation to fill it out to go to San Diego to a Marine educators workshop.
Okay.
And at the time I'm like, hey, other than weight room duty, I don't have much. I filled it out and I was one of like 10 people from Nebraska selected to go on this trip. Yep. Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, and I think Illinois were all there, and Carrie happened to be selected out of Iowa. And that's where we met. Just learning more about the Marines for a week. If anybody has the opportunity to do it, I'll put a plug in. It opened my eyes in terms of not only the experience of the recruit, but we got to learn everything from the time they roll into the yellow footprints to the time they walk across graduation. And it was an amazing experience.
When you started San Diego, I've definitely heard of that program. I've definitely worked with staff who've gone there. They've said great things. So I agree with what you just said. If you have the opportunity, I continue to hear great things about that program. Okay. So 4 months into your role as superintendent at Fort Dodge, And I know it's only been 4 months, but it's been 4 months. So what are the biggest, one or two biggest lessons you've learned so far about being in this new role?
Yeah, great question. I think 4 months into the position, going through the process, thinking about, making the transition again back from Nebraska to Iowa, this time in the role of superintendent, I knew it was going to be very, very important. Just like, the 4 years that I spent in Nebraska, relationships were going to be key. So really taking the time, investing, developing relationships, working closely with my executive assistant. She has a great wealth of knowledge of the community, making sure that she's working with me to find community leaders, people that I need to meet with, getting them on the calendar, whether it's for coffee, lunch, etc. So I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is, wow, that takes a lot of time, energy, effort, especially when you're cold calling, getting people on the calendar, not knowing anything, and just facilitating those meetings. So that's something I think you forget when you're at a place for 4 years, like I was at Raymond Central. You just establish those relationships and you don't think about it again. So that's that first lesson. And then second lesson, I think it comes down to just really understanding process, understanding climate, understanding culture, and really just listening to what are the great things that have happened, in prior years at Fort Dodge. What are people talking about in terms of, what are the things that we're proud of when we say we are Fort Dodge? And at the same time, what are the things that if we had, a magic wand that we would change in an instant, knowing that things don't change in an instant, but just, listening and learning, and just to get a feel for the community, for the school district, all while transitioning my family. I have 3 kids, 8, 6, and 4, and then balancing the move and all those wonderful things. But when it comes down to it, I think the biggest lessons that I've learned is just getting an understanding of the needs, the wants, the desires of the district and the community.
So you did a great job of listing off like the needs, the wants, and desires. Did you have any, like, were those pretty informal conversations, or were they somewhat scripted, or maybe just a little bit more information there?
So I did both. I did a formal process, and I still continue the formal process because I weave this into my one of my goals that I created with the Board of Education. And in those scripted questions, it's really about, tell me the great things about the community. Tell me the great things about the school district. Tell me any of the hot button issues that you may have. What advice do you give to the new guy coming in? But then again, you find yourself in conversations. If you're at a community meeting, if you're having lunch somewhere, and someone comes up and, hey, oh, are you new to town? Yeah. So those are more the informal, but still they count as a touch point. And I enjoy that part.
Okay. So I mentioned before the show, our sponsor is Grunmeyer Leader Services, who they've done a bunch of searches throughout throughout Iowa, but they're starting to branch out throughout the Midwest. And that's kind of what brought us together here. So I'm curious if you could share a little bit, some people who have not gone through a superintendent interview. Maybe they're a head principal somewhere and they've got that superintendent's degree like you've got. What advice can you share about going through that superintendent interview process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing is when you start looking for superintendent positions, it's very important to reach out to complete online portfolio profile through a Trent Grunmeyer and his leadership services. There are a lot of other Midwest individuals, but the key is to have a contact with a consultant. And so that consultant gets to know you. That consultant, really understands what size district you're looking for, location, all of those things. And so when they go through and they land potential positions, they have you in mind. So what can I share about the interview process? The interview process is one that as you develop your material, as you understand the search criteria, as you begin to do research on the community, the most important thing you can do is research, right? Take the time, understand, not that you have to have names of everybody involved, but you should have the names of the board members, memorized. So when you get there, you can start to put faces with names. But I've always thought if you can get in front of Board of Education, if you can get involved in the interview process, then, you need to do your homework, you need to do your research. And at that point, you should have a pretty good idea. Are you interested in the position? Are you not interested in the position? And so all through that, the best thing you can do, use the examples that you've had, share, both your success and maybe even a few times that you've came up short, but you've learned from. Be honest, be open, never overpromise. Never bring up examples of things that you think sound great because they do, but when you get in the position, you understand that it might not be possible. So never overpromise or oversell yourself, because at some point you will be held accountable to it. But it's about building connections. It's about meeting people, and just getting an understanding of what the district is looking for. Oftentimes too, I think when a Board of Education goes through that process, they meet, multiple candidates over a day, over 2, over 3 days. And it comes down to fit. And so, if the first job that comes open that you get an interview that you get really excited for, it's natural to see yourself in that. Just realize that everything happens for a reason. The board didn't see the connection like you did. And in the end, that board needs to see the connection in you, because those 7 individuals are the people that you're going to work closely with. And that relationship is very, very important.
I appreciate you there was a couple of things I wrote. I love how you said memorize the name of the board members. It's a small thing, but it's pretty powerful if you can walk in that room and you said 7 members. I mean, that's, I only have 5 board members here. So remembering 7 is pretty impressive. And I really like, that over promise. What is it? Under promise, over deliver is kind of the setting, the mindset you should have. But I like how you said never over promising. That's great. And then even admitting some of the things you've learned, you said to talk about your successes, but also some of the things maybe you learned from. I love that. Hey, when I was reading your bio, the press release about your hire, one thing that caught my eye was that you had this evaluation system, this 360 evaluation system that you implemented while in Nebraska. Me being a superintendent here for 4 years, I would say the process it's okay. I mean, so far it's been good to me, but it hasn't been super formal. Maybe talk a little bit about the 360 evaluation system that you used.
Yeah, so the Nebraska Association of School Boards, always had talked about the idea of superintendent evaluation. So when you think of evaluation in education, oftentimes you think teacher, administrator, sitting down, going through a lesson, getting into classrooms, walkthroughs, based on a lot of data, a lot of conversation. Superintendent evaluation oftentimes is not like that. Oftentimes it's a checkbox, meets, doesn't meet, and to be honest, the role of superintendent is one that not many people fully comprehend and understand what it all is and what it all entails. And so the Nebraska School Board Association developed this 360 approach that collected data from multiple stakeholders on superintendent evaluation, goals and other pertinent parts of the job. And so taking that data and compiling that data allows the Board of Education to not only get an idea of kind of the culture and climate within the district, but it also gives data on future goals. But at the end of the day, it gives the superintendent something to go off of from a growth perspective. You have to be very open and willing to accept feedback. You get to see the good, the bad, the ugly. But it really brings your board together. It really allows you to grow together. It was a neat process to be a part of, and I can't thank the Nebraska School Board Association to have selected me as kind of a pilot person to go through. But I think, in the state of Nebraska, they've partnered with a lot of school districts and doing a lot of neat things. But again, I think it takes the right board, it takes the right superintendent, and you have to want to get feedback and data in order for that to be successful. So very fun process.
So when I did a 360 survey, I remember giving, the same survey to like 20, at the time I was an administrator, a school administrator. So I gave it to like 20 employees and had them answer the same question, same set of questions. Is maybe explain a little bit what feedback you were asking the different groups to give you.
Yeah. So each of the survey groups, students, classified staff, certified staff, parents, guardians, community members, and board members all had similar but not the exact same set of questions. But data was compiled in the leadership standards, and then essentially allowed a couple or a few open-ended questions. And so what it came down to was, and I have forgotten the Nebraska standards, but that's how they broke it down into like educational leader series of questions. Visibility was a big thing. And knowledge of district, and there was just a lot of good nuggets of information that were all part of that process. Now, the best part is the Nebraska School Board Association would act as a third neutral party. They would collect all of the survey data, and then they would compile all of that survey data for the board. So there was no like, I got to see it before anybody else. The board got to see it before anybody else. And so having that third party facilitate that was also a very nice component to it.
Okay. So earlier you talked about some of the transition conversations you had. One thing I always ask is one professional practice as a school administrator that you do maybe on a consistent basis, whether it's daily, weekly, that you would recommend that maybe other superintendents don't do?
Ooh, that's a really good question. What's a practice that I do that maybe somebody else doesn't do? Well, first and foremost, I think as superintendent, it's important that we communicate. One of the practices I started from the very first day was a weekly board update. I sit down each week, compile the most pertinent information. I look at it as, if I have a board member that goes to coffee in the morning and gets stopped by a community member and says, what in the world is this about transportation? They have knowledge of it in terms of, how to answer the community member, parent, guardian, etc. That's a big thing. I always advocate to young superintendents that it's important to do that. I'm still a guy that I keep a box of thank yous next to my desk. And just as an example, we had an employee who was doing some really neat things at our early childhood center. I happened to be there. I saw it. I got back to my office. I wrote a card, just a thank you for being awesome, popped it in the mail. And, a couple days later that shows up. But I think ultimately the best thing you can do as a superintendent is be visible. Be visible in the buildings. Not that you have to get into classrooms. I still enjoy to do that, but interact with staff, interact with students. That makes graduation and other, big events so much more impactful when names and some stories and that. So that's something I've always tried to be very, very intentional about.
So the next question I ask is, one belief you had 10 years ago about educational leadership that is now different here in 2021. So let's go back to, it was probably, I don't know if it was Dr. Joel at the time, 10 years ago, or if it was Mr. Joel, but go 10 years ago, maybe when you were either an assistant principal or maybe a teacher. What did you believe then that is now different today?
Wow, that's a really, that I should have read that one more closely.
Yeah.
Gosh, so much has changed. So much has changed. I think now, now the fact that I have a family, raising 3 kids, I think it comes down for me to the student discipline, student support, so much of what we talk about today, the mental health of students. I think when I was a young administrator and I was working with kids that were making poor choices, I think oftentimes I was man, how hard is it, right? It can't be that hard to follow rules, to follow expectations. And I think the further I've gone, the more it is to understand the whole child, to understand, what other conditions impact a student's ability to make good choices within school, having some compassion, having some empathy. I think all of that has grown the longer that I've been in the business than maybe when I first got in young, no kids. I may have been married at that point, but yeah, I think maybe that's something, just the outlook and how you deal with student issues, I think is probably the best answer I can give you right now.
One thing I forgot there was a question earlier that I was meaning to ask you.
Yeah.
Jumping state lines. You've done it a couple times now. Some people jump those lines, what have you noticed? I guess the biggest barrier for a lot of people is like that retirement idea, the IPERS or the Nebraska pension system, whatever it is. Any reflections you have for us, anything you've learned about somebody who might be that might be holding them back, just any advice you have?
Yeah, that's awesome. Something again, when you're younger, you don't think too much about. But yeah, I think the number one, the biggest difference is the retirement. I think Nebraska and Iowa both in all the states have really good retirement systems. They don't talk well together. And so I think you do kind of have to be a numbers counter. And at some point you do have to choose, am I Nebraska? Am I Iowa? But I think no matter which state you choose, it's 2 really good states to be an educator in. But I think, going back and forth, I've always told myself that, my understanding of what quality experience and quality learning looks like, it's very similar in Nebraska and Iowa. What's really different is the finance formula, how Nebraska funds education versus Iowa. So, I wouldn't say they're small things, but it's just understanding some of the differences between the 2 states can get a little bit tricky from time to time. But I haven't noticed too much of a difference.
So last thing, before we pop into some of the I guess the quick hitter questions before the show, you talked a little bit about a very unique setting you had with your former district and then the district just to the south of you. So maybe explain that a little bit. That's such a fascinating story.
Yeah. So as I had mentioned, I grew up in a family of educators, with my father being an acting superintendent, who I almost fell out of my chair when he called. He did announce his retirement effective June 30th. So that's exciting for him. But when I was looking to get into the superintendency, knowing he was in Nebraska, I wanted to have my first superintendency be in the state of Nebraska. So my father and I could be acting superintendents in the same state. What I didn't realize is that my first superintendency was going to be the district directly to the north of him, in which my southern boundary line and his northern boundary line touched. And we couldn't have been any more opposite than location. He was in a large district. I was in a small district. He loved the Nebraska funding formula. I did not love the Nebraska funding formula.
Okay.
And so it was just always entertaining to go to conferences and workshops with him, because oftentimes we found ourselves on the different side of the aisle, but we both understood, each other's story, just because, of the communication, and he's always been, a mentor of mine, and the first person I'll call, if I have questions. But that was just always something I never thought was going to happen, and it just so happened. So there was a bit of a running joke, about which Dr. Joel, but technically he was the first. So
was there ever any I think about some, and they were such a big, that you mentioned before, Lincoln was where he was at, such a big district, and you were at Raymond Central. Is that correct?
Yep.
Quite a bit smaller. Any conversations about weather cancellations? Any disagreements?
Oh, yeah. So not necessarily disagreements, but the best was a lot of people waited for LPS, Lincoln Public Schools, to make that decision. So I would text and be like, hey, where are you leaning? Where are you going? And oftentimes I would get back, it's time that you become the first person to make this decision and stop relying on me. And I'm like, thanks. Thanks.
Yeah.
But no, unfortunately, if the bad weather was around and his phone rang and it was me, he would say, I don't know yet.
Gosh, that's good. That's good. Hey, if you're just joining us, this is episode number 89. I'm speaking with Dr. Derrick Joel, the new superintendent at Fort Dodge Community School District in Northwest Iowa. All right, this is the part of the show where we kind of just go through some quick hitters here. First thought that comes to mind. You can elaborate if you'd like, but these are just kind of some fun questions. So you've been in Fort Dodge since what, about July 1st? Is that? Yeah. Okay. What if people check out Fort Dodge, and I was just there a few weeks ago, where's one place you got to check out?
Ooh, one place you have to check out here in Fort Dodge. I would say, gosh, there's a lot of places. Are you thinking restaurant? You thinking public space?
I know I'm putting you on the spot. I always kind of like to know restaurant, if you're willing to go there. I know you got lots, you're meeting all the business owners. You don't want to single one out, but where's a good, I always want to know, where's a good place to go eat at?
I think honestly, probably it's called Shiny Top Brewery. They make incredible pizza. And as of recent, they opened an axe throwing portion.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, it's kind of a unique setup for Fort Dodge.
So what's it called again?
Shiny Top.
Shiny Top.
Shiny
Awesome.
Top Brewery.
That's awesome. Okay, next question. What is one, and this is always, people get a little tripped up on this. I'm probably not doing a good job of asking it, but what is one just like sneaky good purchase, kind of maybe a relatively inexpensive purchase that you're like, man, this really improved my life. You've got to get this.
Oh, sneaky good purchase that improved my life. Well, that is another great question. I would say probably for me was the cell phone charger that is a circle that I can just put my cell phone on instead of plugging it in.
Sure.
I mean, no more wires, no more anything, just sits there. I'd say my AirPods too. I didn't realize how awesome those were. When you put them in your ears and it's the noise cancellation. I've done several meetings over COVID and all of that, and I didn't hear anything, but still to this day in a house with kids, that's been a great investment.
Nice. What is one book that has greatly influenced your life?
Ooh, one book. Well, I would say the one book that probably resonated with me the most, Simon Sinek, Start With Your Why. That one's probably a gold standard for me just because of all the conversations and everything we do. Anymore, I mean, you have to understand why am I doing what I'm doing? Because then in the dark days too, you got to remind yourself, why am I doing what I'm doing? And that's probably been one that's been most impactful for me.
So are you gas station wise, what do you guys have up there? Is it Casey's? Is it Come and Go? What do you got?
Yeah, I'm unfortunately a Casey's guy, that, or fortunately, however you want to look at it. Living in Ankeny for all of those
Oh
years,
yeah. Yep.
there was the Casey's on every corner. Pizza's awesome. I mean, it's good to have.
So the question I asked, you go into Casey's, what are the 3 items you're getting?
Well, taco pizza is number one. Sugar cookie is number 2. And depending upon if my kids are with me or not, I'm probably by the donuts, because they love Saturday or Sunday mornings when we go into Casey's and we grab, a dozen glazed donuts. That's probably their favorite time of the day.
Okay. Can you recall a job you applied for but did not get?
Yes.
What did you learn from that exam? Feel free to share as much or as little as you like. But
Yeah. So actually, it was an interesting story. So, it was right before I accepted the assistant principal position at Ankeny High School, which I didn't know if, being an internal candidate, what my chances were going to be. So I went and interviewed at a different school district. And it was one of those where I felt like the interview went extremely well, made a lot of connections, and I left the interview feeling really, 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 really good. And then a week went by. I didn't hear anything. And I was like, man, and then I think it was like a week and a half before I got a phone call, and it was the thanks, you did a great job, but no thanks. And I was just like, man, and it was one of those too. It's like, what could I have done different? Nothing, and it's just like, man, and I didn't, still this day, I feel like I didn't get any closure out of the deal, but you look back at it and, had that worked out, it would have been a longer commute. I would have never stayed within Ankeny. So, I'm probably better off.
I ask that question all the time, and I hear the same answers almost all the time about like, it worked out for the best. I was bummed at first, but now I realize it probably, it was a better situation for me. So
well, and so much emotion, right? And thought goes into the interview process, or at least it does for me. And so you kind of coach yourself up and you get excited about it. And I think then, if the reality comes that you don't get it, you start to be like, well, man, I thought I was going to get it. And so it's really about coaching yourself back down to, it's okay, there'll be another job.
For sure. Okay. So you got kids, you're busy, you've got all kinds of things going on. You're leading a district. What's your best tip for being productive?
Ooh, start early. No, that's a great question. So, one thing that I'm glad I did when I did was I never stopped going to school. And so I got, I finished Doane College. After I was done with going to college, I actually started a master's degree in curriculum and instruction. But then when I moved to Ankeny Community Schools, I switched to administration. And then I did that. Then I went right into my superintendent's licensure program. And then I went right into my doctorate. And so by the time I was halfway done, I guess by the time I was ready to move to Nebraska, I'd already written my dissertation, everything. I graduated that following January. But that has allowed me to coach my own kids in the adventures they want to have. That's freed up more time on the weekends and the weekdays when I was working on schoolwork. Now that time gets filled But that's something I guess I was really interested in doing, is just getting it all done, so it didn't have to wait. So yeah, I guess that's what it is.
Like it. What's one big goal you are currently working on?
Ooh, one big goal. It's a really good question. One big goal. Can it be to become a scratch golfer? That's never going to happen, but it's a good goal.
You mentioned golfing before the show started, so I didn't know maybe if you're going to go there or not. So you can go whatever direction you want: personal, professional, athletics.
Yeah. Well, I've convinced myself that I'm never going to make the PGA Tour. So that goal's out. And my next goal, I guess the goal is just to continue, the work that I've started in the first 4 months here, but with a balance of family, and just making sure that I'm present not only here at school, but I'm present at home now that my kids are getting to an age where they're very, very active, and my wife and I are going every single which way. I think that's just a good goal to have, is be present in the moment, whether it's at work or whether it's at home.
Okay. Is there anything that we did not talk about that you would like the audience to know?
That's a great question. Very open-ended. I think, at the end of the day, whether, you're an educator or a teacher, an administrator, a superintendent, I think it's whatever you can make it, whatever you want to make it. If you're an aspiring administrator, continue to learn, continue to be active, continue to get the experiences that you can, because when you move up to that next level, it's those experiences that you remember, and never forget what it was like when you were a teacher, never forget what it's like when you were a principal, but just, how valuable people are. I know this is a tough year. We've had a lot of conversations at Fort Dodge about, I think, everybody is starting to feel the burnout a little bit sooner than we have in years past. But it's important, because if you've seen the numbers of the number of people choosing to go in education, getting, teacher certification down, folks are retiring that maybe would have gone a couple more years. And I think we are on kind of the brink of a hiring crisis for education. And so I think we just need to do everything we can to continue to support everybody within the education community, because the day we don't have teachers, the days we don't have paraeducators, the days we don't have bus drivers, it's going to be it's going to be more challenging than it is now. And I feel like, this year we're off to a great start, but, it's been tough. It's been a tough year. And I know we say that every year, but we need to start figuring out more action solutions than not on how to get people excited about being educators.
Is there, I guess, last question, where can people connect with you online? Are you on social media there, or?
Yeah, not a whole lot of social media. I'm on Twitter. My handle is, I think it's @JoelDerrick. I just did my name backwards.
Okay.
That's the other thing, is I have two first names. So that's been something I've battled my entire life. But yeah, I believe it's @JoelDerrick. Yep, @JoelDerrick. You can look me up on Fort Dodge Community Schools email. But if there's anything I can help with, whether it's prepping for a superintendent interview, creating a entry plan, I've done a couple of those, questions on transitioning into a district, all of those wonderful things that when you go through the process, it becomes real, and you really start to put thought to what that's going to look like and sound like.
Well, hey, this has been Dr. Derrick Joel. And yeah, I was almost going to say Joel Derrick, because you got me flipped around there. Superintendent at the Fort Dodge Community School District. Fascinating story, super cool about kind of where his travels have taken him from Iowa to Nebraska and then back to Iowa. So, hey man, I'm gonna get you out of here. You got a meeting tonight. You've got a board meeting. You got an executive leaders meeting. So I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of just share your knowledge with us. I feel like there's a lot of great takeaways from somebody who's doing some really cool things. So thank you so much, man.
Hey, thank you.
All right. Hey, have a good meeting tonight. Okay.
Hey, thanks.